candles had burned down to stubs by the time Adrian Voss understood that he was dying. He lay on the cold marble floor of his penthouse bedroom, fingers pressed against his chest as if he could restart a heart that was slowing with every labored beat. The chandelier above him blurred into cold starbursts of light. He could feel the poison working through him, slow and deliberate, like molten lead poured into his veins. The feeling had left his legs first, then crept upward, patient and certain. He had been celebrating his 34th birthday. The night had been perfect. Or so he thought. The penthouse had glittered with crystal and champagne. 100 guests filled every room with laughter, business partners, old friends, the city's wealthiest. Adrian had smiled through all of it, the gracious host, the self-made billionaire who had crawled out of a one-bedroom apartment in the Creston district and built a real estate and investment empire from sheer will. And Clara had been at his side all evening, radiant in a red silk dress, smiling at him with those warm amber eyes that he had spent 3 years believing in completely. She had handed him his drink herself. He remembered that now. She had poured 2 glasses of champagne, crossed the room, waited while he finished a work conversation, and pressed the glass into his hand with a soft smile. "Happy birthday, my love." He had kissed her cheek and drunk deeply. He also remembered, with the horrible clarity of a man whose vision is sharpening even as everything else fails, how her eyes had slid sideways for just a fraction of a second toward the corner of the room, where a man stood nursing a drink with the patient stillness of someone who wasn't here for the party at all. Derek Malone. Adrian had invited him because Clara asked him to. Her oldest friend, she said. Her childhood, her history, the boy from the same block in the Whitmore district where she grew up. Adrian had put the name on the guest list without a second thought, because making Clara happy was the one extravagance he allowed himself. The one place in his life where he didn't need to be sharp. The door opened. Clara stepped in. She had left the party 20 minutes ago claiming a headache. He had gone upstairs to check on her. He had barely made it 3 steps inside before his legs folded beneath him. She stood in the doorway now and looked down at him. Not scared. Not panicked. Not reaching for her phone. She stood with her arms folded loosely, one shoulder against the doorframe, looking at him with the expression of a person watching a nearly solved problem reach its final step. "Clara," his voice came out barely sound. "Shoo." She crossed the room slowly and crouched beside him, her red dress pooling on the marble. She reached out and brushed hair from his forehead with a tenderness that was more devastating than the poison. "Don't fight it. It moves faster if you don't fight." "Why?" he breathed. "Because you had everything," she said quietly. "And we had nothing. That was never fair." "We." "Not I." "We." Footsteps. Derek stepped into the room. And then, gathering in the doorway behind him, the rest of them. Clara's father Frank, thick-shouldered, bitter-eyed, a man whose grievances had calcified into ideology. Her mother Ruth, small and silent, clutching a handkerchief. And Shane, Clara's younger brother, standing at the back and refusing to look directly at the floor. The whole Holt family. In his bedroom. While he lay dying. The chandelier blurred. The cold spread upward through his back. In the last seconds he had, Adrian Voss did not feel rage, he had expected rage. He felt something quieter and more total. The absolute certainty that he had been a fool. That he had survived the worst years of his life and built everything he had, and handed it to people who looked at his open hands and decided to take the arms too. The dark came. Chapter 2. There was no white tunnel. No warmth. Just black, complete and absolute, and then pain, sudden and total, a shock wave from the base of his skull outward. Then, by degrees, consciousness. He became aware of himself in stages. The headache. Then sensation returning to his limbs, not the numbing cold of poison, but the ordinary ache of a man who slept badly. Then light, filtering through curtains he recognized. He sat up. His old apartment. Not the penthouse, the one he had rented for 6 years when the company was new and money was uncertain. 3rd floor of the Creston building. The water stain on the ceiling shaped like a wolf's head. The radiator that clanked every morning at 6:15. He had not lived here for 4 years. The radiator clanked. He looked at his hands. Younger. Smoother. The scar on his right knuckle from a construction site visit 2 years ago, not there. The watch on his wrist was the old stainless steel one, bought from a pawnshop when he was 28. He lurched to the bathroom and stared at his reflection in the cracked mirror. 30 years old. 4 years back. He pressed both hands against the sink and breathed, slowly, deliberately. In through the nose. Out through the mouth. Treat the panic like weather, not like a verdict. He was alive. He was 4 years in the past. And Clara Holt had not yet entered his life. He stared at his reflection for a long time. The face that looked back was unguarded in a way it would never quite be again, a man who had not yet learned what a smile looks like when it's being constructed for an audience. Then, deliberately, the expression changed. His jaw set. His eyes went flat and certain. His shoulders squared under the weight of what he now carried. "All right," Adrian Voss said quietly to the man in the mirror. Just those 2 words. But they meant everything. Chapter 3. He spent the first week doing nothing but remembering. He lay on the floor of the old apartment with a notebook and wrote everything down, every name, every date, every conversation. No emotion. No interpretation. Just facts in their correct sequence, the way he approached financial analysis. Clara Holt had walked into his life at a charity gala 14 months from now. She would volunteer at the welcome desk, wearing a borrowed dress, with the expression of a woman who understood precisely what room she was in and had prepared accordingly. He had been the one to cross the room. He had pursued the careful retreat she constructed and mistaken it for shyness. He had called her the morning after the gala. And the morning after that. He had built the entire early architecture of their relationship himself, while she gave him just enough to keep building and never quite enough to feel satisfied. He wrote down the names of her family. Frank Holt, 62. Former factory worker, disabled after a warehouse accident. A man whose bitterness had calcified into philosophy, that the system owed him a debt it would never willingly pay, so the debt had to be taken. Ruth Holt, 58. Cleaned houses 3 days a week to keep the family afloat. Shane Holt, 26. Clara's younger brother, running informal gambling pools for cash. And Derek Malone, 32. Clara's childhood sweetheart. The boy from the same block in the Whitmore district, who had grown up alongside her and never stopped being hers, not even when she was wearing Adrian's ring. He made 2 lists. The first was everything he would do differently. The second was what he was going to do to each of them. Not violence, he had never been a violent man. Something more permanent. He was going to take from them exactly what they had tried to take from him. Not just money. Their certainty. Their footing. The ground under everything they thought they had built. He closed the notebook. He slept without dreams. Chapter 4. He went back to work. Voss Capital was at this point a mid-size investment firm, healthy, growing, but not yet the empire it would become. He knew exactly what came next: the Ashford Communications acquisition, the Meridian Tower development, and an early-stage investment in a biotech startup called Cellaris that would go public and make him a billionaire. He knew the timing on all 3. He moved through the next year with the quiet confidence of a man reading a book he has already finished. But he also built differently in other ways. He hired Raymond Doyle 6 months earlier than he had the first time. Raymond was a former intelligence analyst who had the specific gift of finding information that people had invested significant effort in burying. Adrian sat across from him in a coffee shop and told him what he needed: background investigations on 5 people. Financial records, relationship histories, associate mapping. Raymond did not ask why a man with no apparent connection to these 5 people needed comprehensive intelligence on all of them. He took the list. Clara's name was at the top. What Raymond produced confirmed what Adrian already knew in outline and enriched it in detail. Derek Malone maintained 2 accounts that showed a meaningful gap from his declared income: small, regular cash deposits made with the discipline of someone who understood that inconsistency drew attention. One of those accounts traced back to transfers from a personal account in Ruth Holt's name. Not large amounts. Just steady. Just building. They were pooling resources for a plan that required patience and capital. Adrian photographed every document. Stored copies in 3 encrypted locations. Said nothing to anyone. He also called Marcus Webb, the city's finest asset protection attorney, a silver-haired man who had once described his philosophy as making what belongs to you impossible to reach without your permission, in a structure so clean no one can claim it was built for any reason other than legitimate estate management. Marcus spent 3 months redesigning Adrian's entire legal architecture. By the time he finished, every significant asset was held through entities with provenance dating back years, all legally unimpeachable, all constructed before any marriage, before any relationship. Any attempt to claim marital interest would produce nothing. He did not put Clara's name anywhere near it. He also promoted Priya Serrano, his CFO, a decade of shared history in building the company, to a board seat with 10% equity. She looked at him with the alert suspicion of a woman who had learned that good news usually had a condition attached. "What changed?" she asked. "I realized I've been treating loyalty as a given instead of something I need to actively protect," he said. In his first life, he had built in isolation. Afraid to share control. That loneliness had left him surrounded by good people who weren't quite trusted, not quite partners, not quite able to save him from the mistakes only other people can prevent. He had paid for that with his life. He was not going to repeat it. Chapter 5. 14 months after he woke up in the Creston building, he went to the charity gala. He had considered skipping it entirely. If he never met Clara, her scheme had no target. But the conclusion was clear: she would find another Mark. Someone who didn't have the specific foreknowledge Adrian now carried. Someone else would drink from the glass she handed him. Someone else would die on a marble floor. He was the only person who knew what they were. He was the only one who could stop it. He went. She was at the welcome desk. In the borrowed dress. Her features arranged in a configuration that suggested trustworthiness, open, warm, unclosed. The beauty of an unlocked door. He crossed the room. 17 minutes of warm, engaged conversation. She was extraordinary at this, the instinct for exactly the right phrase to disarm, to create the sensation of intimacy in 8 words. Then he excused himself. He did not ask for her number. He walked away and watched, from a distance, the precise half-second of recalibration that moved across her face before her composure reassembled. She had been handed a script and he had walked off the stage. Now she needed to decide whether to rewrite the scene. She would find him. He just needed to know how. He needed to understand the full mechanism before he dismantled it. Chapter 6. She found him 3 weeks later. She ran into him at a coffee shop 3 blocks from his office, not near her apartment, not near her workplace. She had researched his routines, which told him more about her organizational capability than anything else she would show him. He pretended to be delighted. He let her talk. She had prepared a version of herself, Clara Holt, intelligent, quietly dignified, self-made within limited means, proud without self-pity. The bones of it were real. The difficult childhood. The family's financial strain. Her anger at a system that rewarded the wrong people was genuine. What was not genuine was the conclusion she had reached about how to fix it. 6 months in, she brought him to Sunday dinner at the Holt family home. Ruth had spent all day on the meal, a roast with 3 sides, bread from scratch, a dessert that required an hour of preparation. Adrian was gracious, 8 seconds, complimented everything sincerely, and meant all of it. Ruth was an exceptional cook. That was a fact entirely separate from everything else. Frank shook his hand with a grip calibrated to signal he was not impressed and watched him through dinner with the flat assessment of a man checking the progress of a project. Not the discomfort of a proud father accepting a wealthy son-in-law into his home. Something more transactional. More managerial. Every time Adrian disclosed something financial, a deal he was working, a property he had recently acquired, Frank's eyes would cut briefly to Clara, then back. A confirmation check. Is this in the range? Are we on track? Shane's phone buzzed twice during the meal and he excused himself both times with a guilty speed that had nothing to do with table manners. He was funding something through his gambling operation. Adrian had already established small cash injections into the family pool, building over time. He was the logistical nerve of the scheme, the one who kept the money moving without leaving a trail large enough to attract attention. Derek sat at the table and smiled and told good stories and made Clara laugh at all the right moments. He was charming in the practiced way of a man who has used charm as a tool long enough that the performance has become indistinguishable from the real thing. He also, twice, asked Adrian questions about the structure of Voss Capital that were far more specific than friendly curiosity warranted. Framed as admiration. Actually reconnaissance. He observed it all, catalogued everything, wasted nothing. Chapter 7. He proposed 8 months after they met. Not because he was following her timeline, though he was, but because the engagement served him equally well. It gave her controlled access to the surface of his finances, enough to feel the plan progressing, while the real architecture of his wealth sat untouchable behind layers of legal structure she would never reach. Clara said yes. She cried, convincingly. He held her and said all the right things. He felt nothing except the cold, focused certainty of a man who has done what needed doing and is now waiting for the next phase. 3 months before the wedding, he had dinner alone with Derek. He chose a restaurant slightly above Derek's comfortable price range and spent 2 hours being everything Derek Malone would despise: relaxed, successful, generous, entirely without apparent awareness that he was being studied. Over dessert, he mentioned his accountant's recommendation, a significant offshore restructuring of his liquid assets. Tax optimization. A few months of inaccessibility while the structure's finalized, but the long-term benefit was substantial. He was planning to execute it in the new year. He watched Derek absorb this. He watched Derek run the calculation: if the liquid assets move offshore, the timeline has to move up. The birthday is 3 months out. It has to be the birthday. Smart move, Derek said pleasantly. My accountant thinks so. Adrian signaled for the check. He knew Derek would call Clara before he got home. He had just accelerated the clock on a bomb he intended to watch very carefully. Chapter 8. He built his support structure with the precision of a man who had learned, at the cost of his first life, that the biggest mistake was going it alone. Raymond Doyle was already in place. By now he had become something close to a trusted lieutenant. He knew the Holts were a threat, knew Clara was not what she appeared to be, and had long since decided he was not going to ask how Adrian knew what he knew. The most important thing Raymond had learned in his career was that some questions reveal more about the person asking them than any answer could. He also brought in Layla Grant. She was an investigative reporter at the city's most serious newspaper, 15 years of source development, an absolute refusal to be hurried, and the reputation of being accurate to a degree that even the subjects of her stories occasionally acknowledged grudgingly. He took her to lunch and told her he had a story. Not yet, in several months. Full documentation, multiple corroborating sources, bulletproof from a legal standpoint. He just needed her to hold it until the moment was right. She considered this for the time it took to order dessert, which he had learned to read as genuine interest. What's the story? She asked. Fraud. Conspiracy. And at the center of it, a man who has been selling something to people that has killed at least 7 of them. She extended her hand across the table. Chapter 9. The ceremony was held at the Ashwood estate. Clara had planned every detail: the white floral arrangements, the string quartet, the 6-course dinner, with the thoroughness of a woman who had spent her life walking past certain doors and had finally decided she was going through one correctly. What she built was genuinely beautiful. He gave her that. The Holt family sat in the front row. Frank rigid and performing contentment. Ruth in a carefully chosen outfit, watching the proceedings with more emotional complexity than anyone else in her family. Shane pale. He had been pale for weeks, ever since Adrian had quietly mentioned the offshore transfer timeline at the rehearsal dinner. He said his vows clearly and steadily. He meant none of them and felt no guilt about that. He watched Derek across the room during the reception, loose and animated, the relief of a man who can see the finish line. Derek placed his hand on the small of Clara's back once, for a fraction of a second too long, then removed it and glanced at Adrian to check if it had been noticed. It had been. And photographed, by one of the 3 people Adrian had positioned in the room. Their business cards said wedding guests, their actual job was documentation. He danced with Clara. She pressed her cheek against his jaw. He held her correctly, because some gestures needed to be honest even in the middle of a war, where you lost track of which parts of yourself you were fighting to protect. She murmured something he almost didn't catch. He pulled back slightly. Just happy, she said. But her eyes searched his face for a moment, something unguarded in her expression, faster and less managed than anything she'd shown him before. A question she hadn't intended to ask. Then it was gone, and she smiled, and they kept dancing. He thought about that look for a long time afterward. Chapter 10. The honeymoon was in coastal Italy, a private villa outside Positano, 2 weeks, the sea in every direction. Distance seemed to ease something in her. Away from the plan, from her family, from Derek's regular calls, she had room to be a version of herself that required less maintenance. She read books by the water. She argued with him about nothing and was sharp and funny doing it. She fell asleep in the afternoon and woke up irritable in a way that was, he would have admitted under questioning, humanizing. He observed it with a steady sorrow he did not allow to cost him anything. 2 evenings, while she slept, he sat on the terrace on secure calls with Raymond and Marcus, finalizing what he thought of as the return. He also called Layla Grant and said, 3 months. She said, I'll be ready. Back home, he staged his key misdirections. He let Clara overhear a phone call about the offshore transfer being delayed, just a few more weeks. He watched her recalibrate, frustration, then urgency. She would need to move the timeline. He also left his laptop unattended, for exactly 11 minutes, with a draft will open. He had written it himself to look like the work of a man in love who hadn't quite gotten to the lawyers, everything left to Clara, slightly clumsy, entirely convincing. It was not the real will, which was locked in Marcus Webb's office behind 2 passwords. She never mentioned finding it. She just became warmer over the following days. She called Derek 4 times the next day. The clock was running. Chapter 11. He started with the youngest because Shane was the weakest load-bearing point in the whole structure. Break him cleanly, and he becomes an asset instead of a threat. Shane's gambling operation was unsophisticated but functional, informal sports betting pools run through a network of friends, Shane taking a percentage off every transaction. 3 years of cash moving through informal channels with the careful discipline of someone who knew in the abstract it was illegal without understanding how thoroughly it could be documented. Raymond had documented it thoroughly. The file contained transaction records, associate maps, and 3 signed statements from Shane's own runners who had accepted limited immunity in exchange for cooperation. Adrian met Shane at a diner. He placed the folder on the table between their coffee cups and watched Shane work through the pages, his face moving through every stage of a man discovering he has been comprehensively outmaneuvered. That's everything, Adrian said. Every transaction. Every participant. Every account. The runner's statements are already with a third party who releases them on my instruction. He paused. I'm not going to the police. What I want is information, everything you know about the plan. In return, this file stays locked. Shane talked for 2 hours. He confirmed the digitalis derivative, purchased through Derek's contact, lethal in sufficient dose and metabolically indistinguishable from a cardiac event under standard screening. He confirmed the timeline, Adrian's 34th birthday. He confirmed the family's planned role in the aftermath, grieving in-laws, supporting Clara's claim to the estate. And then he told Adrian the thing Adrian had not known. Ruth did not know about the poison. She had agreed to the marriage scheme. She had helped construct the early infrastructure of it. But the killing, the actual murder, had been Derek's addition, brought to Frank, Clara, and Shane privately. Ruth believed the plan ended in divorce, a wealthy marriage, a sympathetic split, a settlement. She had no idea anyone was supposed to die. Would she have stopped it? Adrian asked quietly. Shane looked at his coffee cup. Yeah, he said. She would've. Adrian paid the check. He thanked Shane and walked out, and stood on the street for a moment in the afternoon light, thinking about a woman who cleaned houses 3 days a week to keep a family afloat while her husband planned a murder she had no idea was coming. He revised one part of his plan on the walk back to his office. Chapter 12. Frank Holt was harder, and harder in a way Adrian had expected. Frank was not operating from weakness. He was operating from conviction, total, long constructed, reinforced by decades of legitimate grievance. He had built a philosophy out of his anger, and the philosophy was not wrong in its diagnosis and entirely wrong in its prescription. Adrian went to the Holt home on a Tuesday afternoon. Frank answered in his bathrobe with the flat, careful eyes of a man who has been expecting something and has decided not to be afraid of it. They sat in the living room without tea. I know everything, Adrian said. Not as a threat, as a statement of fact. The compound. The timeline. The pool account. Derek's supplier. He paused. And I know Ruth doesn't know about the compound. Which is why I'm here talking to you instead of to a prosecutor. Frank went very still. The stillness of a man whose footing has been removed and who isn't yet willing to acknowledge what he's standing on. You believe what you were doing was justice, Adrian said. A correction. Redistribution from people who have too much to people who have nothing. I'm not going to tell you the anger behind it isn't real. Your family's story is real, the accident, the years of work that didn't add up, the system that rewarded the wrong people. That's all real. Something moved in Frank's face. He had not expected to be understood. But this fails, Adrian said. And when it fails, it doesn't destroy me, I've already made sure of that. What gets destroyed is your family. Clara faces conspiracy to commit murder. Derek gets 20 years. Shane gets 5. And you, he let that land. Ruth gets to watch all of it. Frank's breathing had changed. Slower. Controlled. A man trying to hold his shape under pressure. Adrian placed 3 documents on the coffee table. A cooperation agreement. A disclosure statement. And the terms under which Shane was protected from prosecution. 48 hours, he said. Talk to Ruth. Tell her everything. Let her help you decide. At the door, he paused and looked back. Frank was still in his chair, staring at the documents, with the specific exhaustion of a man who has been carrying something very heavy for a very long time and has just been offered permission to put it down. The money was never the point, was it? Adrian said quietly. It was proof. Proof that the system that took from you could be taken from. Frank looked at him. For just a moment, the armor was completely gone. Yeah, he said. I know, Adrian said. And he left. Chapter 13. Derek had texted asking to meet, the kind of message that presents itself as casual and reveals under pressure that it is urgent. He was nervous. The timeline was shifting. He needed to assess the target. Adrian met him at a bar and spent 2 hours being everything Derek Malone despised, relaxed, successful, generous, and entirely without apparent awareness that he was being studied. He paid the bill without ceremony and placed a USB drive on the bar as he stood to leave. That's everything, he said. Call records with metadata. Financial records showing the pool account. Shane's statement. Frank's cooperation agreement. Documentation of the compound purchase through your contact, and his complete client history, which includes 7 other deaths over 14 years. He watched Derek's smooth expression dissolve entirely into something smaller and more frightened. When this reaches a prosecutor, it goes as part of a 7-victim conspiracy case. The sentencing guidelines for that are considerably different from a single incident. Derek stared at the drive. I'm not using it today, Adrian said. What I'm offering instead is removal. Leave this city, leave Clara's life, leave mine. 30 days. Don't come back. Don't contact anyone connected to me. He picked up the drive and put it back in his pocket. Or I release everything tonight, to the prosecutor and to a journalist simultaneously. He walked out without looking back. Derek was gone in 12 days. He left his apartment lease broken, his furniture abandoned, his car in the parking garage. He sent Clara one text message, 11 seconds, enough to say goodbye and not enough to explain anything. Clara did not reply. Chapter 14. He went to see Ruth Holt on a Thursday morning with no documents, no agenda, and no recording. Just himself. She answered the door as if she had been expecting him. She looked like a woman who had been awake for several days carrying something she couldn't put down. Frank had told her, just as Adrian had asked. She had the look of someone who has received information that cannot be unreceived. She made tea without asking. He sat at her kitchen table and waited. She sat across from him with the cups between them and the quiet dignity of a woman who has decided that truth is the only currency left worth spending. I didn't know they meant to hurt you, she said. I know. I thought it was just, she stopped. Started again. Taking what the world owed people like us. I know how that sounds. It sounds like what happens to people who've been failed long enough, he said. That's not the same as it being right. She nodded. She did not ask for his forgiveness, which he respected. I came because I wanted to know one thing, he said. Did Clara ever seem like she wanted to stop? Ruth looked out the window at her small garden. She was quiet for a long time. The night before the wedding, she finally said. She called me, very late. She didn't say much, just that she was tired. That she was so tired of all of it. Her hands wrapped around the teacup. I asked if she was all right. She said she was fine. She never asked me to talk her out of anything. But she called. He sat with that. She went through with it, Ruth said. I know that. I know, he said. He stood to leave. At the door, the settlement includes the family home and 5 years of mortgage coverage. Frank's pension review is funded. Shane's file is sealed. He paused. Your daughter will have options. What she does with them is her decision. Ruth's eyes filled. She held it. Why? She asked quietly. Because you made a good dinner, he said. And because none of this started with you choosing to be cruel. He walked out into the morning. Chapter 15. He came home on a Tuesday evening to find Clara in the kitchen making pasta. The smell of garlic and oil. Soft music from her phone. The ordinary choreography of a life that had been built to be dismantled. He hung up his coat, came into the kitchen, and sat at the island and looked at her. She turned. Something in the quality of his stillness made her hand stop over the pan. Derek is gone, he said. Shane gave a full statement to my legal team. Frank signed a cooperation agreement last week. Your mother knows everything. The wooden spoon in her hand went completely still. She turned off the burner. She turned around and leaned against the counter with her arms crossed and looked at him, and for the first time in 3 years, the performance was entirely absent. Nothing constructed. Nothing calibrated. Just Clara Holt, looking at a man who had caught her. How long, she said. A long time. A brief, humorless laugh. And you married me anyway. I needed to understand the whole structure before I addressed it. She absorbed this with the speed of a very capable person processing a reversal. What happens now? The annulment goes through quietly, no press, no public record. There's a settlement. Not what you were planning to take, but enough to make your family stable, which I'm doing for your mother's sake. He held her gaze. In exchange, you sign a full witness disclosure of your involvement, sealed as long as you maintain complete distance from me and everything connected to me. And you testify in a closed proceeding about Derek's supplier. That man has done this before. 7 times. The closed testimony doesn't touch you publicly, but it gives investigators what they need. Her chin came up. You're using me to catch someone worse. Yes. A long silence. Then, quietly, I wasn't pretending through all of it. The life we had, the ordinary parts. Italy. The arguments about nothing. She looked at him directly. I wasn't performing that. He had always known. He had known the whole time and had not let it soften him and was not going to let it soften him now. I know, he said. That doesn't change what I did. No, he said. It doesn't. She signed everything the following morning. The annulment moved through the courts with the seamless efficiency of a legal team that had been ready for months. The sealed disclosure went into Marcus Webb's security vault. The closed testimony was given 12 days later, in front of 2 prosecutors and a federal investigator who had been looking for grounds to move on Derek's supplier for 3 years. They found the grounds. 4 months later, the men who had sold customized compounds for people who wanted deaths that looked natural, 7 times over 14 years, was arrested at his home at 6 in the morning. He was charged with 7 counts of conspiracy to commit murder. He was convicted on all 7. Layla Grant published her story the morning of the arrest. It ran on the front page for 4 days. It named Derek Malone as a cooperating individual, which was accurate and ensured that wherever Derek had gone, he would spend the foreseeable future dealing with that association. It named no other members of the Holt family. Layla won an award for it the following year. She sent Adrian a handwritten thank you note. He sent flowers. Chapter 16. 14 months after the annulment, Adrian sat behind his desk on a Thursday morning reviewing the Cellaris IPO term sheet with the careful attention of a man who has learned, permanently, not to skip the details. Priya sat across from him, tablet in hand. Underwriter wants a lower anchor price, she said. I say we push back to within 5% of our target and accept the risk. Agreed. Push back, but give them the IPO lockup extension. Make them feel like they won something. She made the note. Meridian Tower certificate of occupancy came through yesterday. Ahead of lease-up schedule by 6 weeks. Good. He looked at her. How are we doing? She put the tablet down, which meant the question had landed differently than a routine check-in. She looked at him with the direct, slightly surprised expression she kept in reserve for moments when he asked something human. We're very good, she said. You know that. I do, he said. I just wanted to say it out loud. Raymond stopped by that afternoon without appointment, which he had begun to do occasionally in the way that people who have been through something together sometimes check in without a specific reason. The Holts, he said, settling into the chair. Summary, Shane is clean, 5 months, logistics job, regular paychecks. Frank's pension review came through. Ruth's down to 1 cleaning job. A pause. Clara took a position at a legal aid nonprofit on the south side. Housing cases. Colleagues say she's very good at reading people. The corner of his mouth moved fractionally. At identifying when someone needs more help than they're asking for. Adrian looked at the window for a moment. All right, he said. Raymond looked at him with the direct, uncomplicated eyes of a man who had decided long ago that facts were his job and his employer's feelings were his employer's business. You doing all right? Adrian sat with the question honestly. Outside the window, the city went about its ordinary business, traffic moving, construction somewhere above, a pigeon landing on the ledge and departing, a million small lives navigating a world that was both merciless and generous and didn't particularly care which it was doing to you on any given day. Yeah, he said. I am. He meant it. Epilogue. There is an old idea, ancient, appearing in the mythology of nearly every civilization, about the man who descends into darkness and returns changed. In some versions it is a god. In some a king. In some, just an ordinary man who fell into the deep place and brought back something that could only be acquired there. What Adrian Voss brought back was not rage, though he had expected rage. It was something more precise. Clarity. The kind that only arrives when you have looked at the worst thing you can imagine, understood it completely, and decided, deliberately, with full information, to act anyway. He had not destroyed the Holt family. He could have. But the only people truly ruined would have been people who had been genuinely failed by a world that consistently gives its fewest options to the ones who can least afford fewer choices. He had wanted to damage back. He had. He chose what kind. The company grew. The Cellaris IPO exceeded projections by a margin that made financial journalists reach for superlatives. The Meridian Tower filled to full capacity. Priya became CEO of the manufacturing division, was appointed to 2 national advisory boards, and was profiled in a business magazine under the headline "The Architect Behind Voss." She sent him a copy with a post-it note, "Took you long enough." P. He laughed, genuinely, for a long time. It was one of his favorite moments of the whole second life. He did not remarry quickly. He waited until he understood the difference between wanting to be loved and wanting to be seen, which are not the same thing and which he had spent a year learning to separate. The specific hunger that had made him pursue Clara in a ballroom, that had made him mistake her careful availability for depth, he examined that hunger from every angle until he understood it well enough that it could no longer be used against him. When it happened slowly and without strategy, accumulated time, a person who asked questions that required real answers, a friendship that became something else so gradually that the exact moment of transition was impossible to locate afterward. He paid attention to it in a way he had never paid attention to anything before. He trusted his instincts because he had earned them, had paid for them in the most permanent currency available. He was happy. He held it with the specific care of a man who knows what its absence feels like. Sometimes, late in the evening when the city had gone quiet, he would sit by the window and think about the marble floor. The chandelier blurring above him. Clara's voice, telling him not to fight it. He had fought it. That, in the end, was the whole story. A man who was told to stop fighting. Who had come back to show them what a fighter looks like when he has nothing left to fear and chooses, deliberately, with open hands, to build rather than burn. He turned off the light. He went to where he was loved. He slept without dreaming of marble floors. Revenge is not a fire you put out by feeding it. It is a blueprint you follow until you've built something the fire cannot reach.